This year I'm trying some different techniques with my seed starting, and I'm going to share some of those with you today. Last year I learned about how harvesting peat is actually pretty destructive to the environment, and so I've been looking into alternative methods to start my seeds. One of those methods is to use a potting mix called PittMoss. I'm really excited about it. It's something that I've been trying and experimenting with, and I'm ready to share some of those results with you. This review is sponsored by PittMoss. So what is PittMoss? PittMoss is a seed starting mix that's made out of recycled paper products. A lot of people don't even know that it's available to them, but if you check out their website, you can see all of the different locations near you that may have it in stock. If you're not familiar with the controversy around peat moss, let me catch you up to speed. Sphagnum moss can be found on the surface of wetlands, and over time it decomposes into layers of soil beneath the surface and then becomes peat moss. And this is what is harvested for the peat moss that you see in your gardening mixes today. It's important to note that these bogs are only on 3% of the Earth's surface, but contain 30% of the world's carbon encapsulated in them. This makes them one of the most effective carbon capture systems that we have. Humans eventually found this resource and figured out it was great for aerating soil and for starting seedlings. This started the practice of draining bogs and then mining the peat moss. The controversy comes in because commercial producers argue that the bogs can be restored within 20 years. This can be compared to cutting down an ancient redwood forest and replacing those plants with saplings. As you can imagine, you're destroying an entire habitat whenever you cut down those trees, similar to when you mine a peat bog. So we can consider that yes, we can restore that over a period of 20 years, but that doesn't account for the damage that has been done and also all of this invasive species that may now be introduced to that area. We have since found other effective methods for starting our seedlings that don't have the environmental impact, such as PittMoss. PittMoss is a recycled paper-based product, and it's using a resource that some may consider to be waste and repurposing it into a useful material. This is great because we are able to use a resource in our seed starting that doesn't require the mining of any peat bogs. PittMoss had sent us some soil to try out, and it's definitely been a little bit of a learning experience, but overall I'm really excited about the product. So the one thing is that since it is a paper-based product, it holds a lot more moisture than something like a traditional peat moss mix. So if you are experienced with gardening and you have tried seed starting before, there is some adjustment in the amount that you need to water your plants. It's actually significantly less, and I have had some oopsies and I accidentally overwatered my onions and accidentally ended up killing them with the PittMoss. But it's all about experimentation whenever you learn about new ways to do things. So one thing that I've been trying to do is I have some seeds that I started with a mix of pit and the peat moss, and then I have some seeds that I started with just the pit mix, and I'm just trying to figure out what works best for us. Here are two lettuce plants for comparison. This is just PittMoss in this one, and this is PittMoss plus peat. I will say I accidentally dropped a jacket on top of all of my lettuce plants when they were inside, so some of these kind of got smushed, but I'm in the process of hardening these off, and before I was putting these outside, they looked a lot more similar than what they do now, so I'm not exactly sure what has happened since then, but overall the plants look pretty similar. Now I'm still, like I said, learning how to use the PittMoss properly, so for the time being I think I'm going to lean towards mixing it with some sort of peat, but overall, both plants look pretty good. Here's another example. These are cabbage plants. Once again, PittMoss is in my right hand and PittMoss plus peat is in my left hand. They look very, very similar. The PittMoss one might be slightly smaller, but overall, they're both extremely healthy plants, and I'm getting ready to plant them outside soon. I am putting some of my lettuce plants in these little mini greenhouses that we've made out of recycled milk cartons. This is a really easy, fun project to do, but what it allows me to do is get my plants outside sooner. So right now it's the end of March. It is around the time when I could plant these in the ground, but I'm going to keep them in these mini little greenhouses to start in case we get some cold spurts, and they will grow to be big and healthy, and then I can transplant them in my garden. These are some mustard green plants that once again I planted in the pit and peat moss mix. For me, I feel that as long as I'm using less peat moss, I am making progress in the right direction, and I will hopefully eventually be able to use peat mixed with other things that are better for the environment. So it's definitely a learning curve whenever you're using, like I said, a new material, but I strongly believe that with this product and maybe using some leaf mold or coconut core and making a mix, I could come up with something that's a lot better and more sustainable for the environment. What I do is I mix some of the peat and the peat inside of this container when it's dry. Then I go ahead and pour some really hot boiling water on top of it. This is just to kill any like fungus gnats or anything like that that may have had laid eggs in the soil. And then I stir it all up, let it cool down, and then I plant things in it. You can see from the soil here that this is very wet. This is a plant that I may have slightly overwatered. This is just the PittMoss mix, but it holds so much moisture that you really do only need a tiny bit of water and really only need to water your plants about once a week. Part of my gardening journey to reducing the amount of peat that I'm using is trying to make some leaf mold. Leaf mold is essentially just leaves decomposing by themselves, and what I did in the fall is I put a bunch of leaves in a bucket and I put some water in here and I crushed them up using a digging bar. Every so often I'll come by and I'll crush them with a digging bar, add some more water if I notice that they're dry, and eventually this is going to break down. Ideally, it will break down in about 6 months, but more likely than not, it's going to take about 6 to 12 months. A lot of people will make leaf mold by putting it in a plastic bag and letting it just decompose by itself. That's another option. I originally got this idea because I learned about leaf mold and I learned that a lot of gardeners use it in their normal garden. So I figured, why not use it for seed starting? Now, I don't know if this will work or if this theory works yet, but I will continue to try new things to help us become more sustainable on our farm. So I plan to hopefully next year mix some of this with the PittMoss and try that for my seed starting. Most of the seed starting mixes that you purchase don't have any type of nutrition in them. PittMoss does have some nutrition in it. So one thing I did notice is that as soon as my seedlings sprouted, they grew a lot faster than what I'm normally used to. So that was a really big plus for me, not having to put some nutrition in there right away. I do like to feed my plants indoors once they get their first set of true leaves. So I did do that, and it seems to be working really well in combination with the feed already in PittMoss. One thing with learning any new skill is it can be really overwhelming at first. And I found that with gardening, I kind of just learned how to seed start and stuck with that one way of seed starting until I started learning about peat moss and how it's mined. So I think as gardeners, we can all do a little bit better each year. So even if we're not 100% peat free, but we're making steps towards that, I think that overall we can all make a really positive difference in the world. So there are a lot of other countries that actually have peat-free months. For example, the UK has peat-free April to kind of help spread awareness of how destructive it is to mine peat. So I hope that with this video, you learn a little bit more and have some curiosity about what kind of products you're using in your garden. Now, you don't just have to use PittMoss for your outdoor plants, you can also use them for your indoor plants. So I recently potted up an indoor plant and I used some PittMoss mixed in with the soil that was already there. The plant is doing fabulous. Once again, I'm noticing that I don't have to water it as frequently. So if you aren't really into gardening yet, but you have some indoor plants, I definitely recommend trying it out. Here's my indoor plant that I potted up with some PittMoss. You can't really even tell that it has a paper product in it, but like I said, I just mixed it in with whatever soil I already had in here. I didn't add any additional potting soil, and the plant is extremely healthy. It's been in this soil mix for probably a month and a half to 2 months, and it's very plump and green and healthy. The last thing I want to mention is that I do plan to experiment more with this with my other seed starts, so I'm really curious to see how it works out with some tomatoes and pepper plants and some of my flowers. I'm going to do another experiment where I do just PittMoss as well as the PittMoss peat mix. I'm also hoping to try to get some coconut core and maybe a couple other things to make my own mix with, and hopefully make a mix that's also just peat free but includes some PittMoss in it. So gardening is all about experimenting and trying new things, and it's always fun to kind of see what works and what doesn't. And then obviously there's the human part to it where you can accidentally overwater things.
Drop a jacket.
or Joppa jacket on it. So yeah, so it's kind of fun, but there's a lot of different factors. So if something's not working, just try to pivot and try something else. But I hope this video was helpful for you. I'm excited for the growing season this year, and I'm gonna have more on my seed starting soon too. So thanks again, and we'll see you next week.